He was invisible to her. That was the point, and that was the mistake. While Sabrina Westcott stood at the threshold of the most important night of her career, adjusting her cuffs and reviewing acquisition numbers in her head, a man in gray maintenance coveralls noticed something her $40,000 a month security team had missed entirely. A redirected camera, a tampered lock, a technician who kept watching the CEO instead of doing his job. The maintenance worker saw all of it. Sabrina Westcott saw none of it. And before that night was over, the woman who trusted spreadsheets over people would be hiding in a basement corridor with a man she'd dismissed in under 3 seconds, betting her life on everything she'd gotten wrong about him. Before we go any further, if you're new here, please subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me your city and country. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The Cresthaven Hotel had been designed to make money feel comfortable. Everything about it was intentional, the low lighting in the lobby that softened the edges of people who'd spent too much of their lives under fluorescent office bulbs, the marble floors that clicked under heels in a satisfying way, quiet competence of staff who learned very quickly that the guests who stayed here did not like to be made aware of the machinery that kept the place running. No visible mops, no audible arguments, no reminders that a building this polished still required human beings to maintain it. Travis Kellan understood his role perfectly. He was part of the machinery. He was not supposed to be noticed. He'd been working at the Cresthaven for 14 months, and in that time he'd developed a reputation among the maintenance staff as someone reliable and slightly strange. Reliable because he showed up early, finished what he started, and never complained about being assigned the jobs nobody else wanted. Slightly strange because he was quiet in a way that didn't feel shy, more like a man who'd learned to observe without broadcasting the fact that he was observing. His supervisor, a heavy-set man named Gerald, who'd been with the hotel for 22 years, had once told Travis he reminded him of a cat. "You ever notice how a cat walks into a room?" Gerald had said, somewhere between a compliment and an accusation. Like it's already decided where the exits are. Travis had smiled at that. He hadn't explained why. He was 37 years old, and on this particular Thursday evening in March, his primary concern was whether the electrical panel in Subballroom C had a grounding fault that could trip the circuit during the Westcott Medical Systems event, currently filling the main floor above him. His secondary concern was that Maisie's school had called that afternoon about a permission slip he'd forgotten to sign, and he needed to remember to text her babysitter about it before 9 o'clock when the woman went to bed. These were the things Travis Kellan thought about now. Electrical panels, permission slips, whether there was enough of Maisie's favorite cereal left, or if he needed to stop at the store on the way home. Not threat vectors, not extraction routes, not the particular way a man's eyes move when he's cataloging a room for operational purposes rather than professional ones. Except once you've spent 12 years learning to see those things, you don't entirely stop seeing them. The training doesn't leave. It just goes quiet, like a radio turned down low, still transmitting. Travis was kneeling beside the panel with a voltage meter in his hand when the radio turned back up. He noticed the technician first. There were 12 temporary staff brought in for the Westcott event caterers, AV people, a florist's team. Travis had seen them filtering in through the service entrance over the past 2 hours, and he'd registered each of them the same way he registered most things, a quick, unthinking inventory. Approximate age, body type, what they were carrying, whether they moved like someone who knew where they were going or someone figuring it out as they went. 11 of them moved like people doing jobs. 1 of them moved differently. He was maybe 25, lean, wearing the same gray polo shirt as the rest of the AV team. He was carrying a cable case, which was correct. He was positioned near the AV equipment rack, which was correct. But in the 40 minutes Travis had been working in the adjacent corridor, the man had touched the equipment exactly twice, both times when someone else walked nearby, and had spent the rest of his time performing a very controlled, very subtle surveillance of the main ballroom entrance. Not the room, the entrance. Specifically, the spot where Sabrina Westcott would be standing when she addressed her investors at 8 o'clock. Travis finished checking the grounding fault minor, correctable. He made a note and walked slowly toward the service corridor that ran parallel to the ballroom's east wall. He moved the way he always moved at work, purposeful but unhurried. Clipboard in hand, nothing about him that said he'd noticed anything at all. The service door at the corridor's far end had a lock. Travis paused at it, checked it, tried the handle. The lock was engaged, but the mechanism had been interfered with. Someone had inserted a small plastic shim into the latch, housing the kind of thing you wouldn't spot unless you were specifically looking for it, and that would allow the door to be opened from either side without a keycard. The shim was painted gray to match the housing. That was not improvised. That was planned. Travis looked up at the camera mounted at the corridor's junction. Its indicator light was green, suggesting it was active. But the lens was angled 2 degrees off from its standard position, not enough to be obvious, enough to eliminate the doorway from its field of view. He stood there for a moment, holding his clipboard, doing math that had nothing to do with electrical panels. Redirected camera, compromised lock, a watcher positioned to track a specific person's movements. He'd seen this before. Not in Colorado, not in a hotel. In a village outside Mosul, in 2009, 2 hours before an intelligence operative was taken. Cresthaven's head of security for special events was a man named Derek Paulson, and when Travis found him in the temporary command room off the main lobby, Paulson was standing with 2 men in suits who had the practiced look of private security wide at the shoulder, narrow at the attention span. "I need 2 minutes," Travis said. Paulson looked at Travis the way people in expensive rooms look at maintenance workers who walk in without being invited. "We're in the middle of something." "I know. That's why I'm here." Took more than 2 minutes. Travis explained what he'd found: the shim, the camera angle, the technician's behavior, and watched Paulson's expression cycle through mild irritation, dismissive skepticism, and the particular blankness of someone who didn't want to be told there was a problem they'd missed. "Our team swept this venue at 4 o'clock, one of the suit men said. His name tag said Harmon. Twice. "I understand that," Travis said. "What exactly is your background?" Paulson asked. The question wasn't curious. It was the kind of question that meant, "You're a hotel maintenance worker, and I don't know why I'm still talking to you." Travis had gotten that question in various forms for the past 5 years. He'd learned to answer it in the way that was true without being the kind of true that derailed conversations. "I have some relevant training," he said. Harmon almost smiled. "Relevant training. The lock has a shim in it. The camera's been adjusted. Your technician in position 4 hasn't touched his equipment in 40 minutes. These are observable facts. You can verify all 3 of them in about 7 minutes." Travis paused. "I'd suggest doing that before 8 o'clock. Paulson sent someone to check. Travis waited in the corridor outside, leaning against the wall with his clipboard, and thought about Maisie. Specifically, he thought about the permission slip. Her class was going to a natural history museum next week, and she'd been talking about the dinosaur exhibit for 3 days, with the kind of intensity only 8-year-olds can sustain about specific topics. Couldn't forget the permission slip. The someone came back and spoke quietly to Paulson. Paulson looked at Travis with an expression that had rearranged itself into something more complicated. "The lock," he said. "And the camera," Travis said. "The technician's gone. He wasn't on our verified list. He came in with the AV crew, but nobody checked his specific credentials against the master sheet." Travis nodded. He'd expected that. "We can't cancel the event," Paulson said. He wasn't being dismissive now. He was being practical, which was almost worse, because it meant he understood the problem and was already calculating around it. "There are 300 investors in that room. The acquisition announcement is the entire minus." "I know," Travis said. "I'm not suggesting you cancel it. I'm suggesting you move Ms. Westcott's position, add coverage on the service corridor, and pull your people back from the main exits, slightly so they're not." He stopped, because the lights went out. Not gradually, not a flicker. The entire floor went dark in a single cut, emergency lighting blooming amber a half-second later, and from inside the ballroom, Travis could already hear the sound that followed darkness in rooms full of people. The rising, confused noise of 300 voices discovering simultaneously that something was wrong. Travis was moving before Paulson finished his first sentence. He'd known this would be the diversion, the ballroom, the guests. The main exits, where trained security personnel would instinctively concentrate, because that's what training tells you to do, pushed the crowd toward the exits. Secure the principal, which meant the service corridor, the freight elevator, compromised door, would have exactly the coverage they'd planned for. None. He took the east service corridor at a pace that was almost running, navigating by the amber emergency lighting and 14 months of learning exactly where every junction and door in this building sat. He passed a startled catering staffer, a rack of folded linens, a floor drain he'd replaced 2 weeks ago. He pushed through a fire door and took a maintenance stairwell down half a level to where the freight elevator opened into the hotel's service underbelly. He heard her before he saw her. Not Sabrina, he heard one of the men. A short, clipped instruction in a voice that was trying to be quiet and authoritative simultaneously, the tone of someone accustomed to giving orders in controlled situations who was now under time pressure. Travis slowed. He moved to the corner of the junction and looked without leaning. 2 men, both wearing contractor lanyards that were wrong. The color was right, but the font on the ID cards was slightly off, which you'd only notice if you'd spent time learning what forgeries looked like. One was larger, positioned behind Sabrina Westcott, one hand on her arm. The other was pulling the freight elevator door. Sabrina Westcott was not screaming. That surprised him slightly. She was rigid, her jaw set, her eyes moving with the specific focus of someone who was frightened and thinking simultaneously, not surrendering to the fear working inside it. He registered that about her. It was relevant. She had something in her hand. Her phone, dark, they'd probably already told her to keep it down. Or they'd jammed the signal in this section. Both were possible. Travis took 3 seconds. He assessed. 2 men, one restrained principal, tight corridor, freight elevator as the objective. The larger man was the physical anchor. The other was task-focused, distracted by the elevator. Time window before the elevator arrived, unknown. He moved on the task-focused one first. What followed lasted less than 90 seconds, and Travis was not proud of it, the way the word proud implies a performance. He was not thinking about the past. He was not accessing some dormant warrior spirit. He was solving a geometry problem in a narrow hallway, using his body the way he'd been trained to use it efficiently. Minimally, with the specific goal of removing a threat without escalating it into something that got the principal hurt. It worked. Not cleanly, nothing in a narrow hallway works cleanly, but it worked. The larger man got a forearm across the throat and went into the wall, hard enough to take him off his feet. The other one tried to run and made it exactly 4 steps before Travis had him by the collar and the wrist, bent at an angle that made running both impossible and very uncomfortable. Sabrina stumbled sideways, catching herself on the corridor wall. Travis held the second man still and looked at her. "Are you hurt?" She stared at him. In the amber emergency light, her face was something he wouldn't be able to fully read: shock. Certainly, but underneath it something that was trying to reorganize itself into control. She stopped. "Your maintenance," Travis said. "Are you hurt?" "No." She straightened up, and he could see her making a decision to be functional rather than frightened. "No, I'm not hurt." "Good, we need to move." He took her down. Not out down. Away from the exits that would be watched. Away from the lobby and the main service entrance and the freight elevator that someone had already planned around. Travis knew this building's skeleton, the way you learn a building when your job is keeping its systems alive. The mechanical section beneath the main structure, accessible through a panel in the lowest service corridor that most of the hotel staff had never opened because nothing required them to. Sabrina said very little during the first few minutes. She was keeping up. She was wearing heels that cost more than Travis's monthly salary, and she didn't complain about them once, which he noticed, and she was watching him the way someone watches a person when they're deciding whether to trust them. He understood the calculation she was making. An hour ago, he was a maintenance worker she'd walked past without looking at. Now she was following him into a basement. He'd have been suspicious, too. "What's your name?" she said, when he stopped to check a junction point. "Travis Kellan." Travis. She said it like she was anchoring herself to something real. "How do you know where you're going?" "I know this building." That's not a full answer. "I know," he said. "Give me a few more minutes and I'll give you the rest." She almost said something sharp. He could hear it in the pause, and then didn't. She was smart enough to know this wasn't the moment. They went further down. The mechanical section was not comfortable. It was loud with the low, constant roar of industrial HVAC equipment, poorly lit by utility bulbs on 20-foot intervals, and smelled of machine oil and concrete. Travis cleared a space near one of the equipment housings, checked the room's 2 access points, and turned back to Sabrina. She was standing with her arms crossed, not defensively, he thought, more like she was cold and consolidating. "Okay," she'd said the rest. Travis told her. Not all of it, not the 12 years, not the deployments, not the names of the places he'd been and the things he'd done there. Just the relevant portion. enough training to recognize what had been set up upstairs, enough experience to understand how these operations moved. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "My security chief is Derek Paulson," she said. "I've had him for 3 years. I talked to Paulson. He's not the problem." Travis paused. "But someone gave those men your schedule. Your exact movements tonight, the route you'd use to reach the private entrance, the timing of your event. That's not guesswork. That's internal." Something moved across Sabrina's face. Not surprise, exactly. More like confirmation of something she'd been hoping wasn't true. "My keycard was cloned," she said slowly. "It wasn't a question. Most likely. Someone inside my company. Or someone with access to someone inside your company." Travis watched her process it. "Ms. Westcott, Sabrina. The building's going to be secured within the hour. Local PD is on a response protocol for events like this. What I need you to do right now is stay here, stay calm, and let me figure out a way to reach Paulson that doesn't go through channels someone might be monitoring." "You think they have comms?" "I think they planned a 4-minute extraction from a blackout in a venue with 300 witnesses. Yes, I think they have comms." She nodded slowly. Kind of nod that means I don't like this, but I understand it, which Travis had learned long ago was the most honest response a person could offer to an impossible situation. "All right," she said. He used components from one of the HVAC control panels, a battery relay, a signal repeater, meant for the building's maintenance communication system, to put together something that was barely a radio and only intermittently cooperative. It took 22 minutes, and during those 22 minutes, Sabrina Westcott sat on an equipment housing in a $30,000 dress and watched him work without saying anything that wasn't useful. He appreciated that more than he expected to. When the signal finally connected broken, staticky but connected, and Travis reached a police frequency that confirmed the building was being locked down, he let out a breath he hadn't fully realized he'd been holding. "They're coming in," he said. Sabrina closed her eyes briefly, opened them. "Okay, it's going to be a while before it's safe to move." "I know." She looked at him in the utility bulb light. "Why did you come after me?" "Paulson had more resources than you. More personnel. You could have stayed with him and just directed them." Travis thought about how to answer that honestly, because by the time I explained it to enough people, he said, "There wasn't going to be enough time. And because you knew what to do." "Yes, because of who you used to be." He paused, I suppose. She looked at him for a long moment. "Who did you used to be?" Travis set down the improvised relay and considered the ceiling, where the HVAC roar filled every silence. "Someone else," he said finally. It was a long time ago. Sabrina seemed to understand that this was the most complete answer he intended to give right now. She accepted it. They sat in the mechanical section for another 40 minutes, the industrial equipment thundering around them, while the police secured the floors above. 3 hours later, in the parking area behind the hotel, Travis was giving a statement to a detective when he heard his name. Not his name, a version of his name. The version that made everything else quiet. "Daddy." He turned. Maisie was running across the parking lot in her pajamas, her dark hair loose, her face in the particular configuration of a child who has been told there was an emergency involving a parent and has been waiting, terrified, in a way that only resolves when they can actually touch you. Travis dropped to one knee and caught her before she'd fully stopped moving. She wrapped both arms around his neck and didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. Travis held her and breathed and felt the 8-year-old weight of her against his chest, and the hotel and the corridor and the mechanical room all receded to where they were supposed to be behind him. Done. Finished. When he finally looked up, Sabrina Westcott was standing 10 feet away. She was watching the two of them together, and whatever the expression on her face was, Travis couldn't read it completely. But something's about it looked like a woman encountering something she hadn't known she was missing until she saw it in front of her. She turned away quickly, toward the detective who needed her. Professional. Composed. Sabrina Westcott, CEO. But Travis had spent 12 years reading people in high-pressure situations. He'd seen the moment before she turned. Later, after the statements were done, and the detective had Sabrina's card, and the babysitter had brought Maisie to the car, and Maisie was asleep in her booster seat with her cheek against the window, Travis sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. He thought about the shim in the lock, the camera, technician who'd been watching instead of working. He thought about 14 months of grounding faults and fluorescent bulb replacements, and Gerald's observation about cats and exits. And he thought about how strange it was that the thing he'd buried deepest in himself had surfaced tonight, not because he'd gone looking for it, but because someone else had needed it to. He started the car. In the back seat, Maisie shifted in her sleep and murmured something he couldn't make out. He glanced at her in the mirror. She was fine. She was right there, pulled out of the parking lot, and the Cresthaven's lights disappeared in the rearview mirror. Tomorrow he had a permission slip to sign. The permission slip was still on the kitchen counter the next morning, unsigned. Travis stood at the stove in the gray early light. Turning bacon in a pan that needed to be replaced, the handle had been loose for 3 months, and he kept meaning to buy a new one, and staring at the permission slip like it had said something offensive. His right hand had a bruise across the knuckles from the corridor wall. He'd noticed it when he woke up. He'd pulled his sleeve down before Maisie came into the kitchen. She appeared in the doorway at 6:53 in her dinosaur socks, her hair an honest disaster, dragging her backpack by one strap. "Is that bacon?" she said. "Yes." "Are you okay?" He looked at her. She was 8, and she asked questions the way 8-year-olds do directly, without the social scaffolding adults build around things they want to know. He'd always found it both disarming and, on certain mornings, a little difficult to deflect. "I'm fine, Bug," he said. "Rough night at work. The babysitter said there was an emergency." There was. "It's handled." Maisie climbed onto her chair and studied him with the specific attention she gave things she wasn't completely sure about. She had her mother's eyes. That was the thought Travis didn't let himself finish most mornings. He slid the bacon onto a plate and set it in front of her. "Permission slip," he said, picking up the pen. "You remembered," she said, and smiled with her whole face. He signed it. He put it in the front pocket of her backpack, where she wouldn't lose it. He made sure her shoes were tied. He drove her to school, and when she ran toward the entrance, without looking back, because at 8 you don't yet know that the people watching you go are the ones you should turn around. For Travis sat in the parking lot for a minute longer than he needed to. His knuckles ached. He drove home. He made coffee he barely tasted. He sat at the kitchen table with his phone and scrolled through 3 missed calls from a number he didn't recognize, and one voicemail from Detective Carol Reyes of the Denver PD that said, in a professional and measured voice, they needed to speak with him again when he was available, and could he please call back at his earliest convenience. He called back. His earliest convenience was 40 minutes later, in the parking lot of a Walgreens, because Reyes had asked if he could come in and he'd said yes, and then realized he had nothing else to do with a Thursday that had already started wrong. The Denver PD building downtown was the kind of place designed to be functional and nothing else. Detective Reyes was a compact woman in her mid-40s with close-cropped hair and the manner of someone who had long since stopped using more words than necessary. She shook his hand, offered him coffee, and didn't comment when he declined both. They sat across from each other at a table that had seen a lot of difficult conversations. "You have an interesting background, Mr. Kellan," she said. "I'm a hotel maintenance worker. Currently." She opened a folder. Before that, 12 years Naval Special Warfare. 2 Bronze Stars, a classified commendation from 2013 that I couldn't pull up for obvious reasons, and an honorable discharge 4 years ago. She looked up. "You want to tell me why a man with that file is fixing circuit panels at the Cresthaven?" Travis looked at the table. This was the conversation he'd had pieces of before, with former colleagues who called occasionally, with a VA counselor he'd seen twice, with Gerald once when Gerald had asked about a scar on Travis's forearm, and Travis had given a 1-sentence answer that Gerald had respected enough not to follow up on. "I have a daughter," he said. "She needs a father who comes home." Reyes held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once and moved on. She was good at her job. What followed was 2 hours of systematic questioning about the events of the previous night, the shim, the camera, the false technician, the 2 men in the corridor. Reyes recorded everything and interrupted occasionally with precise follow-up questions that told Travis she'd already been working for several hours before he arrived. She'd pulled the hotel's available security footage. She'd identified one of the men Travis had stopped a private security contractor with a history of work in corporate intelligence, the kind of resume that was designed to look legitimate from certain angles and illegal from others. The second man was still unidentified. The operation was sophisticated, Reyes said. It wasn't a compliment. Coordinated blackout, jamming equipment on the freight level, pre-positioned personnel across 3 hotel departments. This took weeks of planning, at least, Travis said. which means either someone with significant resources funded it, or someone inside Westcott Medical Systems provided the operational intelligence. She paused. Or both. Travis had been thinking about this since the mechanical room. Keycard. Ms. Westcott's executive access card was cloned sometime in the past 30 days. Our forensic people pulled the log data from the hotel's access system this morning. Someone used a copied version of her card to access the service corridors twice in the past week. Daytime visits, brief, nothing flagged, because her card was legitimately in the system. Internal source, Travis said. That's our working assumption. Reyes folded her hands on the table. Ms. Westcott is cooperating fully, but she's also currently running a company where we're asking her to treat everyone around her as a potential suspect. That's not a comfortable position. Travis imagined Sabrina Westcott walking into her office that morning. He thought about the way she'd looked at her own company from a basement corridor, the specific expression of someone reordering information they thought they understood. No, he said. It isn't. He ran into her unexpectedly 3 days later. He'd returned to work at the Cresthaven Gerald, had called twice, apologetically, explaining that the grounding fault in sub-ballroom C was still technically Travis's open ticket, and they were hosting a conference Thursday that needed that panel resolved. Travis had gone back because he needed the hours, and because staying home looking at his kitchen ceiling accomplished nothing constructive. He was in the same service corridor as the night of the event when he heard the heels. Sabrina came around the corner with a woman Travis didn't recognize who was carrying a leather portfolio and trying to keep pace with a CEO who walked like someone permanently running slightly behind schedule. Sabrina stopped when she saw him. The woman with the portfolio almost walked into her. Ms. Westcott, Travis said. Travis, she seemed not surprised exactly. More like she'd half expected this and hadn't decided what to do with it. What are you doing here? Open work order, he said and held up the clipboard. She looked at the clipboard, then at him, then briefly at the bruise on his knuckles that he hadn't bothered to hide today because it was mostly faded. Can I have 5 minutes? She said. She turned to the woman with the portfolio. Give me 5 minutes, Deb. Deb retreated around the corner with the expression of someone accustomed to being asked to give 5 minutes. Sabrina and Travis stood in the service corridor. It was the same corridor. The damaged lock had been replaced, the camera returned to its correct position, but the door was still the same door, and the hallway was still narrow and functional and not designed for conversations. I wanted to thank you, Sabrina said, properly. I gave a statement to Detective Reyes, and I mentioned specifically that. You don't have to thank me. I know I don't have to. She said it with a slight edge that was automatic rather than hostile, the reflex of a woman who didn't like being interrupted. I wanted to. There's a difference. Travis looked at her. She was in a different suit today, dark blue, equally expensive, and she looked composed in the way people look composed when they've been working very hard to seem like nothing has changed. But there were shadows under her eyes that weren't there 3 nights ago, and her jaw had the particular set of someone managing anxiety through control. How are you doing? He asked. The question seemed to catch her slightly off-center, like she'd prepared for the conversation to go in a different direction. I'm fine, she said. And then, almost immediately, as if she'd heard herself, actually, I'm not sleeping particularly well. We have investigators going through 3 years of internal communications, and every person on my senior team is currently under some degree of scrutiny, which makes my work environment approximately as comfortable as you might imagine. She paused. But the company is still standing. The acquisition announcement is being rescheduled. So, professionally, I'm fine. Professionally, Travis said.
Yes.
He nodded slowly. Reyes told me the keycard was cloned from inside your organization. Something tightened in Sabrina's expression. She told me the same thing. Do you have a theory? Several. The word was careful. Controlled. None I'm prepared to say out loud yet. Travis understood that. You didn't name suspects until you had something that was more than instinct. Because naming a suspect out loud changed how you behaved around them. And if you were wrong, you'd burn something you couldn't rebuild. Careful, he said. Whoever planned this, they're not finished. What happened at the hotel was an attempt that didn't work. That means there's still a goal that wasn't achieved. Sabrina looked at him for a moment. You think they'll try again, she said. I think the goal was to use you to authorize something. Transfer, access to systems, something that required your direct involvement under circumstances that weren't voluntary. That goal doesn't go away just because the first attempt failed. She absorbed this with the stillness of someone storing it in a place they'll return to later. You know a lot about how these things work, she said. I used to know more than I wanted to. She held his gaze. Why did you leave? The Navy. You didn't have to tell me the whole thing the other night, I understood that. But you seemed someone who was very good at it. Travis thought about several different versions of an answer. My daughter's mother left when Maisie was 3, he said finally. I was deployed. She was gone before I got back. He said it plainly, the way you say something you've made peace with by repeating it often enough. I came home to an 8-unit apartment building, a 3-year-old who didn't know which man at the airport was her father, and a choice about what kind of life I was going to build from that point. Maisie needed someone whose primary job was being there. So that became my primary job. Sabrina was quiet for a moment. He watched her recalibrate something the way people do when they realize they've been carrying an assumption about someone, and it no longer fits. That must have been. She started. It was what it was, Travis said. Not unkindly, just accurately. She's a good kid. She's the reason for most of what I do. From around the corner, Deb cleared her throat diplomatically. Sabrina glanced back and then returned to Travis. I want to hire you, she said. I've spoken with my board and with Reyes, and we both agree that... No, Travis said. She blinked. She was not. He suspected a person who heard that word a great deal. You haven't heard the offer, she said. It won't change the answer. I have a daughter and a job, and I'm not looking to rearrange either of those things right now. He paused. But if there's something specific, I can help with something that doesn't require me to rearrange my daughter's life, I'm willing to talk about it. Sabrina studied him with the expression of someone rapidly adjusting their approach. Fine, she said. Let's talk about it. What followed over the next 2 weeks was not what Travis had expected, though he wasn't entirely sure what he had expected. Reyes kept him informed, more than she was technically obligated to, because Travis had given her something useful at the start of the investigation, and she operated on a principle of reciprocity. She called him on a Tuesday evening while he was helping Maisie with a worksheet about the water cycle, and he stepped into the hallway and stood very still while she told him what the forensics team had found. The cloned keycard had been created using a reader installed on a device, registered to Westcott Medical System's internal IT infrastructure, which meant whoever had done it either worked in the IT department or had access to IT equipment. The financial trail from the 2 men in the corridor led through 3 shell companies to a private security firm that had gone dormant 18 months ago, but before it went dormant, it had filed several contracts with corporations in the healthcare sector. Contracts that were now being pulled and scrutinized. Someone who knows the healthcare space, Travis said. Someone who's been in it a long time, Reyes said. The shell structure is old. Patient. This wasn't put together in the months before the event. This was years of preparation for an opportunity that required specific conditions. Travis thought about the 300-person investor event, the public announcement of the acquisition. Sabrina visible and scheduled and surrounded by people who created the appearance of protection while actually creating the appearance of chaos. They needed her company at a specific moment of vulnerability, he said. Big announcement, lots of moving parts, staff focused outward. That's exactly what our analysts said. A brief pause. Mr. Kellan, I want to share something with you, and I want to be clear this does not leave this conversation. Understood. We have a name we're looking at. Bennett Crowley, Chief Operating Officer at Westcott Medical Systems, been with the company 6 years. Financial forensics found an inconsistency in a procurement contract from 2 years ago that looks small on its own but connects to a pattern. We're not at an arrest yet. We're not close. But he's in the picture. Travis said nothing for a moment. Does Sabrina know? We've been careful about what we share with her directly, because she interacts with Crowley daily, and we can't risk her behavior signaling to him that something's changed. We've shared the general direction. Not the name yet. After the call ended, Travis stood in the hallway outside Maisie's room and listened to her, working through the water cycle worksheet, muttering the stages to herself in the slightly wrong order, and he thought about Bennett Crowley. He didn't know the man, had no face to attach to the name, but he knew the type not from corporate America, but from a decade of watching the way certain people embedded themselves in systems, built trust over years, made themselves indispensable, and used that indispensability as infrastructure for something else entirely. Patient people, careful people, the most dangerous kind, because they never seemed dangerous at all. He went back in and helped Maisie finish the worksheet. He went to Sabrina's office the following week. It was not his idea. She'd called him on the phone he hadn't given her, which meant she'd obtained it through Reyes, which he filed under things to decide how to feel about later, and said there was a security review of her building's emergency systems that her current team was unqualified to conduct properly. She said this in the tone of someone who'd already prepared 3 responses to his refusal. He went. Westcott Medical Systems occupied 4 floors of a glass building in Denver's tech corridor, and the lobby was the kind of lobby that told you immediately how the company wanted to be perceived. Serious, modern, expensive in a tasteful way. The name in clean letters on the back wall, behind a reception desk, staffed by someone whose professional cordiality was calibrated to the millimeter. Travis had worn his cleanest civilian clothes and still felt slightly out of place. Sabrina met him in the lobby herself, which he suspected was not something she normally did for consultants. "You came," she said. "You said emergency systems review, and mentioned Reyes's name twice in under a minute," he said. "That's not really how you ask someone to evaluate your sprinkler system." Her expression cracked, briefly, into something that was almost a smile. "I'm not great at asking for things," she said. "I noticed." She took him upstairs. The security review was genuine. She wasn't wrong that her building's emergency response protocols were inadequate for the level of threat that now existed around her specifically, and Travis spent 3 hours walking floors and checking camera positions and access points and having actual professional conversations with her head of facilities, who was competent and appreciated being talked to rather than around. But between those conversations in the glass-walled conference room where Sabrina had set up a working station, Travis and Sabrina talked. Not about the case, exactly. Around it. The way you talk about something when you're both circling the same facts from different angles. "Bennett has been with me since almost the beginning," she said at one point. She was standing at the window looking at the street below. Travis was reviewing an access log printout that the facilities manager had given him. He helped build the procurement system, the vendor relationships. Half of what the company runs on operationally, he had a hand in designing. "That kind of access doesn't just happen," Travis said without looking up. "It gets cultivated." "You think he planned this from the beginning? 6 years ago?" Travis set down the printout. "I think some people decide very early what they want from a situation, and they're willing to be patient in a way that most people aren't." Sabrina turned from the window. "You're not going to tell me who Reyes is looking at, are you?" "No. You know. I know some things I can't tell you yet," he said, "because telling you would change how you act, and how you act right now matters." Quiet for a moment. The city moved behind the glass. "I hate that makes sense," she said. "I know. I feel like I'm in a building that I built, and I don't know anymore which walls are real." Travis looked at her. Not the CEO. The 30-year-old woman who'd been running at full speed since she was probably 22, who'd built something extraordinary and was now discovering that the building had cracks she didn't put there. "The walls are mostly real," he said. "You just have to find the ones that aren't, which is a different kind of work than what you're used to." "Is that something they taught you? In the Navy?" "No," he said. "That's something I figured out afterward, when I had to learn how to trust a babysitter with my daughter." He paused. "You start small and you pay attention." She looked at him for a long moment with an expression he couldn't entirely name. "Okay," she said. The board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday. It was supposed to be a routine session quarterly review, update on the acquisition timeline, a presentation from the COO on operational efficiency projections for the coming fiscal year. Bennett Crowley had prepared 47 slides. His assistant had circulated them the night before. Travis wasn't in the building. He was at Maisie's school, sitting in a plastic chair that was designed for a child, watching his daughter explain to her class correct order of the water cycle stages with a confidence that made his chest ache in a good way. He'd taken a personal day. Gerald had given him a look but said nothing. His phone buzzed during the evaporation section. He glanced at it. Reyes. He slipped into the hallway. "It's moving," Reyes said. Crowley attempted to initiate an emergency transfer authorization this morning using a secondary protocol he'd built into the procurement system. Our forensics team had flagged the protocol last week and set a monitoring trigger. The moment he activated it, we had everything we needed. Travis pressed his back against the hallway wall and looked at the fire exit at the far end. "Sabrina? She's fine. She's in the building. We have 2 agents with her." "And Crowley?" currently being asked to remain in his office while our people finish processing the authorization records. An arrest is probably within the hour. Travis let out a slow breath through his nose. She should know before it happens, he said. Not from an agent, from someone she trusts. A pause. I agree. Can you get there? He was already looking at his watch. Maisie's presentation had 10 minutes left. Her teacher would walk the class to lunch afterward. The school was 6 blocks from a bus line that connected to the tech corridor. He could be in Sabrina's building in 40 minutes if everything cooperated. Yes, he said. He walked back to the classroom doorway. Maisie was mid-sentence, gesturing at a diagram on the board. She had her father's hands, he'd noticed that early, and when she pointed at things, she used 2 fingers instead of 1. He watched her for 30 seconds. Then he stepped back into the hallway and sent a text to the babysitter. He got there in 38 minutes. The lobby receptionist called upstairs, and Sabrina came down herself, which was the second time she'd done that now. She took one look at his face and steered him away from the main lobby into a smaller sitting area near the elevators. Tell me, she said. He told her. Not everything he let Reyes carry the official weight of it, but enough. Bennett, the procurement protocol, the authorization attempt that morning, the 6 years of patient architecture. She listened without speaking. He watched her face very carefully, because that was a thing he'd learned to do, and couldn't unlearn reading people in moments where the information arriving was bigger than what they'd prepared for. She didn't cry. She didn't seem on the edge of it. What he saw instead was something older than sadness, a kind of exhausted recognition. The expression of someone who realizes they've been right about a feeling they'd spent years hoping was wrong. 6 years, she said quietly. That's what they're looking at. I gave him responsibility for the procurement rebuild. I promoted him. I defended him in 2 board reviews. She stopped, looked at her hands in her lap. I thought I was good at reading people. You are, Travis said. He's just very good at being read incorrectly. She looked up. Is that supposed to make me feel better? No, he said honestly. It's supposed to be accurate. She absorbed that. Outside the sitting area, the lobby continued its professional hum, the automatic doors, the clicking heels, the receptionist's practice courtesy. The ordinary machinery of the building, indifferent to what was happening in the glass box near the elevators. What do I do now? She said. Travis thought about it. He gave her the real answer, not the comfortable one. Now, you go back upstairs. You act as normal as possible for the next hour, because there are employees in that building who don't know yet, and they need their company to look stable. You let Reyes do what Reyes does. He paused. And tonight, you go home and you eat something real and you sleep, because you've been running on adrenaline and performance for 3 weeks, and your body is keeping score. She looked at him for a long moment. You're not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone who'd be more impressed by all this. She gestured vaguely at the building, the lobby, the implication of everything the Cresthaven name carried. Most people are. I've been in places where the difference between coming home and not coming home was whether I kept my head clear, Travis said. Nice buildings don't factor into that. Something shifted in her face. Not toward sadness, toward something quieter. Something that was paying attention. Maisie, she said. She had something at school today? He looked at her. How did you know that? You have a school function look, she said. You had it when you walked in. You kept checking your watch on the way up. Travis discovered, to his moderate surprise, that he didn't entirely dislike being read accurately. Her class presentation, he said. Water cycle. Did she do well? She nailed the condensation part. He stood up. Go back upstairs. Sabrina stood as well. She was 2 inches shorter than him, without the heels she'd been wearing at the Cresthaven, and she looked at him with the directness she used for everything, the same attention she'd given the ballroom entrance. The mechanical room, the window overlooking the street. Thank you, Travis, she said, for coming today. You didn't have to. I know, he said. It was the same answer she'd given him about the thank you, 3 days after the hotel. He said it for the same reason she had. She heard it. Tell. She went back upstairs. He waited in the lobby long enough to get a text from Reyes that said, in 3 words, Bennett is secured. He texted back, good. Then he texted the babysitter to confirm the pickup, and walked out into the afternoon and thought about nothing in particular, except that Denver in March was colder than it had any right to be, and that Maisie had asked for waffles for dinner, and that the day had ended in the right direction. That was enough, for now. It was, in fact, considerably more than enough. Bennett Crowley was arrested on a Thursday afternoon at 2:47 p.m., and by Friday morning, his face was on 3 local news websites and 1 financial industry newsletter that covered healthcare sector corporate governance with the enthusiasm of people who had been waiting years for exactly this kind of story. Travis saw it on his phone while he was eating cereal at the kitchen counter. Maisie had already left for school. The apartment was quiet in the particular way it got, after she was gone, not empty, exactly, more like a room between breaths. The photo they'd used was Bennett Crowley's company headshot. He looked like every senior executive Travis had ever seen in a briefing photo, composed, confident, slightly angled toward the camera in a way that implied authority. Kind of face that made you believe instinctively that this was someone who knew what he was doing, which Travis supposed was the whole problem. He finished his cereal, rinsed the bowl, and called Reyes. She answered on the second ring, which told him she'd been awake for a while. "You saw the news," she said. "I saw the news. Before you asked, the leak didn't come from our office. Crowley has a lawyer who made some calls last night, and the lawyer has a contact at the newsletter. We're not happy about it, but it doesn't materially affect the case." "How is Sabrina?" Travis asked. A brief pause. "Functional. She put out a statement this morning through the company's PR office. Very measured, very professional. The board stands behind the investigation. Full cooperation with authorities. The usual. Her communications director wrote it, but she edited it heavily." Another pause. "She also called me at 6:30 this morning to ask if there was anything she could do to accelerate the evidence processing timeline." "What did you tell her?" "I told her the evidence doesn't process faster because the CEO wants it to," Reyes said, in a tone that suggested this had not been the answer Sabrina was hoping for. "How are you doing?" The question caught Travis slightly sideways. Reyes was not a person who asked personal questions without a reason. "Fine," he said. "Why?" "Because you've spent 3 weeks in the middle of something that most people would have stepped back from after night 1, and I've been in this job long enough to know that fine is usually the answer people give when they're running on fumes and don't want to admit it." Travis leaned against the counter and looked at the window. March had finally started to soften. There was actual sunlight coming through the glass, the tentative kind that Denver produced in early spring, like it wasn't entirely sure it was committed to the idea yet. "I'm not running on fumes," he said. "I'm running on coffee and the awareness that a man who planned a kidnapping in detail is currently not in a position to try again." "That's actually not bad. That's an interesting definition of fine," Reyes said. "It's an honest one." She let it go. They talked for another 15 minutes about the evidence timeline, the shell company structure that was slowly unraveling through financial forensics, and the question of whether the 2 men from the Cresthaven corridor had additional accomplices who hadn't yet been identified. When they hung up, Travis stood at the window with his coffee for a while. He was thinking about something Reyes had said 3 days earlier, almost in passing, that the way Crowley had built his internal position at Westcott Medical Systems, the careful cultivation of trust, the slow accumulation of access, the patience of someone who understood that institutions move on inertia, and inertia can be steered, was consistent with methods he'd seen before in cases with intelligence community connections. Not active connections, she'd been careful to say. Historical ones. The kind of thing you learned in certain environments and took with you when you moved into the private sector. Travis had not asked which environments. He had a list of his own. He'd spent 12 years in organizations where that kind of knowledge was currency. And he'd met, over those years, a certain category of person who accumulated it deliberately not for any specific ideology, but because information and access were themselves the point. The goal was never one particular outcome. The goal was always the next position of advantage. Bennett Crowley, he suspected, had not simply decided 6 years ago to defraud Sabrina Westcott. He decided to place himself where, when the right opportunity materialized, he would be positioned to take it. The acquisition announcement had been the opportunity. The healthcare network data, the proprietary system that Westcott Medical Systems had spent 4 years building, was the prize. Forcing Sabrina's authorization under duress, or framing her for the transfer after the fact. Either worked, from Crowley's perspective, because either put the network in play. The part that Travis kept returning to was the framing angle. That wasn't improvised. Framing a principle for crimes you committed yourself required a significant amount of pre-positioned evidence. It required documentation created in advance, digital trails seeded carefully, A narrative built slowly enough that no single piece looked deliberate. That kind of preparation took not weeks but months, possibly longer. He called Reyes back. "The financial irregularities in the procurement contracts," he said, without preamble. "How far back do they go?" A pause. "The earliest flag our forensics team found is from about 2.5 years ago." "Are there any discrepancies in Sabrina's financial authorizations from that same period? Anything that looks like her signature or her access credentials on documents she might not actually have reviewed?" A longer pause. "I'll have someone look at that today," Reyes said. Her voice had shifted slightly, the particular shift of someone whose working theory has just been handed a new corner piece. "You think he was building the frame while he was still building the access?" "I think he planned to need a backup," Travis said. "And people who plan backups start early." He was right. He didn't find out for 4 days, but he was right. Reyes called on a Tuesday morning while Travis was under a ventilation unit in one of the Cresthaven smaller event rooms, and she told him in the measured voice of someone delivering a confirmation they'd been hoping not to need, that the forensics team had found 14 instances across an 18-month period where Sabrina's executive credentials had been used to access and marginally modify financial authorization records. Small modifications. The kind that looked like rounding errors or clerical adjustments until you laid them all out sequentially and saw the pattern. Crowley had been building a false financial history with Sabrina's name on it. If the kidnapping had succeeded, if she'd been taken long enough to force an authorization, or disappeared long enough to create ambiguity, there would have been a coherent documentary record suggesting Sabrina Westcott had been systematically diverting funds from her own company's medical network contracts. Enough to force her resignation. Enough, possibly, to result in criminal charges that would take years to untangle. By which point the network data would have been sold, the shell companies dissolved, and Bennett Crowley would have been 3 countries and several identities removed from anything traceable. Travis explained this to Sabrina that evening. She'd asked him to come to her apartment, not the office. Her apartment, which was a different kind of request, and one he'd considered for approximately 90 seconds before deciding that what she needed right now was not for him to be cautious about where conversations happened. She lived in a high-rise in the Cherry Creek neighborhood, and her apartment was the kind of place that had a view and very little in it that was personal. Clean lines, good furniture, art on the walls that was tasteful in an impersonal way, as if someone had made informed choices about what a successful person's home should look like, rather than what a specific person's home should look like. There were 2 framed photographs. Both of them were professional, one at a company launch event, one at what appeared to be a charity gala. No family. No friends caught off guard at a barbecue. No slightly embarrassing vacation photos. Travis noticed this. He didn't say anything about it. She poured wine she didn't offer him a glass of for the first 3 minutes, which told him she was more unsettled than she appeared. He sat at her kitchen counter, expensive stone, very clean, the kind of kitchen that didn't look like it was used for actual cooking, and waited. When she finally sat down across from him, she had the wine and the expression of someone who had been professional all day and was deciding whether she was still required to be professional now. 14 times, she said. He used my credentials 14 times. In 18 months, I was in those systems constantly. I reviewed reports, I signed authorizations, I attended audits. She shook her head slowly, and I never saw it. You weren't looking for it, Travis said. That's not a very satisfying answer. I know, but it's the right one. He leaned forward slightly. The modifications were calibrated to stay below the threshold of anything that would flag in a standard review. Someone spent real time learning exactly how your internal systems worked, what your review habits were, what amounts and categories would read as noise instead of signal. This was not an attack on your intelligence. It was an attack on the fact that you're one person running a large organization, and nobody can personally examine every transaction. Sabrina turned her wine glass in her hands, not drinking it, just turning it. I trusted him, she said, not with anger, with something flatter than anger. The tone of someone accounting for a fact. People who are good at cultivating trust are dangerous, precisely because the trust is real, Travis said. You weren't wrong to trust him based on the available information. You were working with what you could see. He was managing what you could see. She looked up. Is that another thing from the Navy? That's from 4 years of learning how to trust a school system. A pediatrician and 3 different babysitters with my daughter, he said. You trust people based on evidence. Sometimes the evidence is managed. The mistake isn't the trust. It's assuming that because the evidence looked right, no one was arranging it. Sabrina was quiet for a moment. How do you not become someone who trusts nothing? She said, after all of it. The deployments, whatever you saw, and then coming home to that. How do you not just decide everything is a threat? Travis thought about the question. He gave it the weight it deserved. Maisie, he said simply, you can't raise a kid in a bunker. She needs to think the world is mostly okay. And you can't fake that if you don't actually believe it yourself, at least partially. He paused. So I made a decision to believe it partially, to stay open enough for her. Not because I stopped understanding risk, but because the alternative was raising a daughter who was afraid of everything, and that seemed like a worse outcome. Something in Sabrina's face softened. Not dramatically, she wasn't a dramatic softener, but the professional composure shifted slightly at its edges, like a window with a crack in it letting in weather. She's lucky, Sabrina said. Maisie, most days she'd tell you her greatest problem is that I won't let her have a guinea pig, Travis said. Sabrina made a sound that was almost a laugh, short and genuine, changed the temperature of the room by several degrees. The formal investigation into Bennett Crowley and his network of shell companies took on institutional momentum of its own over the following weeks, the kind of momentum that didn't require Travis's involvement and, in fact, was better off without it. Reyes had career investigators and forensic accountants doing the granular work, and Travis understood clearly that his role, such as it was, had shifted from active participant to something more like an informed observer, which suited him. He had a panel in sub-ballroom C to finish, and a daughter who'd become extremely interested in whether guinea pigs were hypoallergenic. But Sabrina called him with something specific on a Wednesday afternoon that he hadn't anticipated. I need a strategy, she said. Not security, strategy. He was in the parking lot of Maisie's school, waiting for dismissal. For what, he said. Crowley's lawyer is making noise about a civil suit. They're claiming wrongful internal investigation, defamation, all the usual procedural obstruction. It's not going to go anywhere, but it's going to create noise, and noise at the wrong moment could rattle the board's confidence in the acquisition timeline. I'm not a lawyer, Travis said. I know that. I have lawyers. She paused. What I need is what you told me that night in the mechanical room. About not fighting where the enemy expects you to fight. Travis leaned against the car and watched the school's front door. Dismissal was in 4 minutes. Tell me what he expects, Travis said. He expects me to respond. Publicly. Either to defend myself or to counterattack, which gives his lawsuit legitimacy as a narrative. He expects the board to see me on the defensive. He expects the acquisition to slow because the optics are complicated. And if you don't respond publicly, it looks like I'm either guilty or weak. Neither is wrong, Travis said. It looks like that to people who are watching for your response. Most of your investors aren't watching for your response. They're watching the company's financial indicators and whether the acquisition timeline is intact. He paused. What's the board's actual concern? Not the lawsuit, the real concern underneath it. A brief silence. That there's more they don't know. That Crowley's involvement was symptom of a systemic problem, not an isolated one. That the company has vulnerabilities they can't see. So address that, Travis said. Directly. Not the lawsuit, not Crowley, the systemic question. Commission an independent governance review. Full scope. External firm. Credibility above reproach. Results published to the board before the acquisition moves forward. He watched the school door open. You're not responding to Crowley's lawsuit. You're demonstrating that your company's integrity is worth examining under maximum scrutiny. That's a completely different posture. The school door opened, and children started coming out. Going to surface things, Sabrina said slowly. Things that don't look great, even if they're minor. Yes, Travis said. And when the external review finds those things, and you publish them anyway, what does that tell your board? Pause. That I'm not hiding, she said. Right. Which is the opposite of what Crowley's narrative requires. He could hear her thinking on the other end of the line. Maisie appeared in the doorway. She was wearing the jacket with the broken zipper that Travis had been meaning to replace, carrying her backpack and a piece of construction paper with something drawn on it in purple crayon. She spotted his car, and her face did the thing it always did, uncomplicated, total, the happiness of a child who is simply glad to see the person they love. I have to go, Travis said. I know, Sabrina said. Thank you. Don't thank me. Execute it. I will, a beat. Travis, this works? He watched Maisie navigate the crosswalk at the sort of angle that was technically correct, but maximally inconvenient for waiting drivers. Never fight where they expect you to fight, he said. That's not a guarantee. It's just better odds. He hung up and got out of the car to meet her. The governance review was announced 11 days later. It landed differently than Crowley's lawyer had anticipated, which was apparent in the fact that the financial newsletter that had broken the story of Crowley's arrest now ran a piece headlined with language about transparency and institutional accountability that was, while not exactly enthusiastic, substantially more favorable than the coverage of the previous month. More importantly, the board held. Travis heard about this from Sabrina in a text that said, in its entirety, board meeting went fine. You were right. And then, 3 minutes later, don't get smug about it. He was making dinner when the text came. He was making pasta, which was one of 4 things he could make reliably and well, and Maisie was sitting at the kitchen table with the purple crayon drawing. It was a guinea pig, he'd confirmed, rendered with the hopeful specificity of an 8-year-old, making her case through art and telling him about a disagreement she'd had with her best friend at school that day, over the correct way to play a game Travis didn't fully understand. He read the text and felt something that was not quite a smile and not quite relief, but was adjacent to both of them. He put his phone down and paid attention to the pasta and to Maisie's account of the dispute, which had its own internal logic and several characters and a moral dimension that was, in its way, completely serious. The board held. The acquisition timeline was intact. Crowley was in a legal process that was going to take years and not go well for him. Travis added salt to the water and asked Maisie whose turn it was to set the table. But things do not resolve as cleanly as announcements suggest. Travis had learned this too many times to expect it now. The second shoe dropped on a Saturday morning, when Reyes called with a name Travis didn't recognize, Marcus Fell. Former private intelligence analyst, mid-40s, worked 3 years under contract for the healthcare sector before transitioning into what official records described as independent consulting. Fell's name appeared in the financial records of one of Crowley's shell companies, not prominently, not in a way that would have been found quickly, but it was there. More importantly, Fell had a pattern. Reyes had pulled his prior history through channels Travis wasn't going to ask about. Twice in the past 8 years, companies in regulated industries had experienced significant internal data events, not breaches, not hacks, but strategic leaks of proprietary information at moments of corporate transition. In both cases, the trail led to someone who'd had access and motivation but never faced charges because the evidence, while suggestive, wasn't prosecutorial. You think Crowley didn't work alone, Travis said. I think Crowley was the inside man, Reyes said, and Fell was the architecture. The shell companies, the intelligence methodology, the frame construction on Westcott's credentials, that's not a COO's skill set. That's someone who's done it before. Travis sat with that. Is Fell in custody? No. We have enough to bring him in for questioning, but we don't have enough to hold him. He's aware of the investigation. His lawyer has already been in contact with our office. A pause. He's not going anywhere. His passport has been flagged. But I want you to understand that this case has another layer, and that layer isn't closed. Does Sabrina know? She'll be briefed Monday morning. Travis thanked Reyes and sat at the kitchen table after the call ended in the apartment's Saturday morning quiet and thought about layers. He'd known operations with hidden layers, the kind where the visible problem was real, but was also, simultaneously, a screen for the thing behind it. You dealt with the surface problem and felt the relief of resolution, and then something in your peripheral vision moved and you understood that the job wasn't finished. He wasn't going to tell Sabrina before Monday. That was Reyes's call to make, and Travis had enough respect for the boundaries of what he was and was not to override it. But he drove past the Westcott Medical Systems building, on his way to the hardware store that afternoon, the loose panhandle, finally, after 3 months, and looked up at the glass floors and thought about a woman sitting in her clean apartment with 2 professional photographs and a view of a city she'd built a company in, and the particular isolation of being the person at the center of something this large. He thought about how she'd turned the wine glass in her hands, how she'd said I trusted him in that flat, accounting voice. He bought the pan handle. He went home. He fixed the pan. Maisie watched him reattach the handle with the focused attention she gave tools and mechanical things, which was something Travis noticed and thought about with a private, complicated satisfaction. Is it hard, she asked. This part, no. The hard part is remembering to fix it before it gets worse. She considered this with the seriousness she applied to most information. Like teeth, she said. Exactly like teeth. She seemed satisfied. She went back to her drawing. Travis set the repaired pan on the stove and looked at it for a moment. The handle was solid now. It wasn't going anywhere. Monday came, and with it Reyes's briefing, and with that Sabrina's call at 11:15 in the morning. Travis was in the Crest Haven's East Corridor, which by this point felt like a location he'd been assigned to permanently by some bureaucratic process he hadn't been consulted on. Marcus fell, Sabrina said. Reyes told me on Saturday, Travis said. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner. She explained the protocol. A pause. Doesn't make it easier. No. I keep thinking I've seen the bottom of it, and then there's more floor. Her voice was controlled. Professionally controlled, which he was beginning to be able to distinguish from actually controlled. How much more is there? I don't know, Travis said, honestly. Fell is likely the ceiling. The shell companies all trace back through structures he'd used before. The methodology matches. It probably doesn't go higher than him, but I can't promise you that. Probably, she said. Probably is the honest word. She was quiet for a moment. He heard something that might have been her office chair, or the ambient sound of a building that contained several hundred people continuing to do their jobs while their CEO absorbed information about the full extent of how thoroughly someone had tried to take everything from her. Travis, she said, what do you do with it? With the fact that you can't see everything, that you can never guarantee you've seen everything. You do the work that's in front of you, he said. You deal with what you can verify, and you build the kind of structures, the kind of governance review you just commissioned, that mean the next person who tries this has a harder time embedding themselves. That's a practical answer. It's all I've got. What's the non-practical answer? He thought about it for a moment. Some things don't resolve cleanly, he said. Some situations end without the feeling of ending. You wanted Crowley and Fell and whatever is behind them to add up to a closed door. They don't. The door is mostly closed. Mostly is what you get to work with. A long silence. I don't love that, she said, I know. But I understand it. Another pause, shorter this time. How's Maisie? The shift surprised him not unpleasantly. She's working on a comprehensive written argument for why a guinea pig would be beneficial to her emotional development, he said. Is she winning? She's frighteningly persuasive, Travis said. Sabrina made that sound again, the one that was a real laugh, short and unguarded, the laugh that was hers and not the CEO's. I'd like to meet her sometime, she said. If that's something that would be my... She stopped, which was unusual for her. She was not a person who let sentences fall apart. Let me think about that, Travis said. Carefully, because Maisie was not something he moved quickly with, and Sabrina knew him well enough now to understand that this wasn't a no disguised as a pause. Of course, she said. I thought I'd say it. I'm glad you did. He stood in the east corridor of the Crest Haven Hotel, where 4 weeks ago he'd found a shim in a lock and recognized a pattern that 12 years of a buried life had given him the eyes to see. The door with the new lock was 10 feet away. The camera was correctly positioned. The building was by any measurable standard entirely ordinary. We're going to be okay, Sabrina said. It was not a question, but it wasn't quite a statement either. Travis looked at the door. Yes, he said. Work to do, but yes. That was, he had learned, the truest thing you could say about most situations that mattered. Work to do. But yes, the formal offer arrived on a Tuesday, delivered not by email but by actual paper in an actual envelope, which Travis suspected was Sabrina's way of making it harder to dismiss with a quick swipe on a phone screen. He found it in his mailbox on a Wednesday morning, between a water bill and a coupon circular, for a grocery store he didn't use. The envelope had the Westcott Medical Systems logo in the upper left corner, embossed slightly, the kind of detail that cost money without announcing it was trying to. He stood at the mailbox in the apartment building's lobby and opened it. The offer was 3 pages. The salary figure was on the first page, and Travis read it twice to confirm he hadn't misread it. He hadn't. It was more than he'd made in his last 3 years of Navy pay, combined. With benefits structured in a way that suggested Sabrina's HR department had thought carefully about what a single father with an 8-year-old would need. Health coverage, flexible hours, a provision for school schedule accommodation written into the contract itself, which was the detail that told him she'd spent real time on this and not simply handed the template to a lawyer. He read all 3 pages standing in the lobby. Then he put the letter back in the envelope, went upstairs, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The offer was generous. It was more than generous. It was the kind of offer that changed the material shape of a life, the kind that would mean Maisie could go to whatever college she chose without Travis spending the intervening decade calculating whether he'd saved enough. It would mean replacing the car. It would mean the guinea pig was suddenly a much smaller logistical obstacle. He looked at the apartment. The pan he'd fixed was on the stove. Maisie's latest drawing, a more ambitious guinea pig, this one with a name, Gerald Jr., which Travis appreciated on multiple levels, was held to the refrigerator by a magnet shaped like a football helmet from a team he didn't follow, acquired at a school carnival 2 years ago. The window over the sink had a crack in the lower corner of the frame that he'd been meaning to report to the building manager for 6 weeks. He called Sabrina that afternoon. She answered immediately, which meant she'd been waiting. "You read it," she said. "I read it." "And no," he said. Pause. Not surprised he thought she'd anticipated this, but working through it. "Travis, I'm not saying no to the work," he said. "I'm saying no to that version of the work. Full-time security director means I'm on call in ways that put Maisie second, and I've already decided she comes first. That decision isn't up for renegotiation based on salary." He paused. "But I want to help you build something. Something that doesn't require me to be physically present in your building 40 hours a week." "What does that look like?" she said. Not argumentative, genuinely asking. "Your emergency preparedness systems are inadequate," he said. "Not just at the corporate level, your medical network serves hospital clients who are equally inadequate. Rural facilities, small regional hospitals, places that have minimal security infrastructure and significant data vulnerability. That's a real problem, and it's a problem I understand from a different angle than your current consultants do. You want to design an emergency response program. I want to help you design one, on a consulting basis. Defined hours, defined deliverables, flexible enough that I can be at school pickup when I'm supposed to be at school pickup." He heard her breathe. "The salary in the letter," she started, "is too much for what I'm describing," he said. "We can talk about fair compensation for what I'm actually going to do. I don't need you to take care of me, Sabrina. I need the work to fit the life I'm building." Another pause. Longer this time. "Most people would have taken the offer," she said. "I know. It doesn't bother you? Leaving that on the table?" Travis looked at the guinea pig drawing on the refrigerator. Gerald Jr. had been rendered with remarkable anatomical ambition for someone who'd never owned one. "It bothers me a little," he said honestly, "but less than the alternative would." Sabrina was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had shifted slightly away from CEO and toward the woman who'd turned a wine glass in her hands and talked about trusting people. "Okay," she said, "we do it your way." "Good," he paused. "The offer was thoughtful, though. The school schedule provision. I figured you'd notice that. Hard to miss. I wanted you to know I was paying attention," she said. And then, without elaborating, moved on to logistics. They started meeting twice a week. Not at the Westcott building, too formal, too much of a commute for what was supposed to be a flexible arrangement, but at a coffee shop 3 blocks from Maisie's school that Travis had been using as an unofficial office for months. It had reliable Wi-Fi, booths that afforded some privacy, and a staff that had learned to bring his order without being asked. He'd been coming long enough that the afternoon barista, a young woman named Petra, who was finishing a graduate degree in something she'd explained once and Travis hadn't retained, called him by name and didn't try to make conversation. Sabrina arrived at the first meeting 12 minutes late because she'd been on a call that ran over, and she walked in still pulling her coat off and looking at her phone. And the 7 people in the coffee shop, who happened to look up when the door opened, registered the fact that she was someone before they could have explained why. She sat down across from Travis and immediately noticed his coffee was nearly empty. "Sorry," she said, "the acquisition call." "How'd it go?" "Well. Slowly, but well." She flagged Petra, ordered an Americano, and set her phone face down on the table in a gesture that Travis had come to recognize as deliberate. She did it when she'd decided the thing in front of her was the priority. "Show me what you have." He showed her. He'd spent the prior week pulling publicly available data on emergency response failures at rural hospital facilities, power outages, data breaches, physical security incidents, and building a framework for what a comprehensive preparedness program would need to address. It wasn't polished. It was a yellow legal pad with his handwriting on it, which she looked at with an expression that was trying not to be amused. "You don't use a laptop?" she said. "I use a laptop for things that need a laptop," he said. This needed thinking, not formatting. She read through his notes. He watched her read. She was fast, the kind of reader who didn't need to go back, absorbing information in single processes, with the focused efficiency of someone who dealt with large volumes of it daily. Her Americano arrived, and she drank half of it without seeming to notice. Communication failure point, she said, tapping a line on the third page. You're saying rural facilities need redundant communication systems that don't depend on their primary data infrastructure. They need to be able to function if everything digital fails simultaneously, Travis said. Which sounds basic. But most of these places haven't tested that scenario, because testing it requires taking systems offline. Even briefly, and there's always a reason not to do that this week. Because this week, there's always an emergency, or the budget meeting, or the staff shortage, or the software update. He nodded. The preparedness exercise always loses to the immediate operational need, which means the preparedness never gets built until after the crisis that makes it necessary. Sabrina set down the legal pad and looked at him. That's exactly what happened to me, she said. I know. I had crisis protocols. I had a security team. I had procedures. She picked up her coffee. None of it was designed for someone embedded inside the organization. All of it assumed the threat was external. Most organizational security does, Travis said. Because external threats are visible, and internal threats are people you've chosen to trust. And building systems that account for your own team feels like an admission that you can't judge character, which nobody wants to make. Right, she thought for a moment. How do we build something that addresses that without making every hospital feel like they're being surveilled by their own administration? And that was the conversation that consumed the next 2 hours, and the meeting after that, and the one after that. It was, Travis discovered, a genuinely interesting problem, the intersection of physical security design, organizational psychology, communication infrastructure, and the specific pressures that rural medical facilities operated under. It required the kind of thinking he'd done in a different context for over a decade, applied to a domain where the stakes were different, but the underlying logic was recognizable. He was, to his moderate surprise, good at it, not just the tactical pieces, the whole architecture of it. How systems failed, and where they failed, and what redundancies actually worked versus what redundancies existed on paper, and gave administrators the feeling of preparedness without the substance of it. Sabrina was good at the parts. He wasn't the organizational dynamics, the regulatory landscape, the political realities of getting hospital administrators to change established procedures. She knew how institutions moved and what arguments actually persuaded the people who controlled budgets. They made it, turned out, a functional team. The question of Maisie came up organically, as most things with genuine weight tend to. It was a Thursday evening in April, and they were finishing a working dinner at the coffee shop, the first time they'd met in the evening rather than the afternoon. Because a conference call with a hospital network in New Mexico had pushed everything in Travis's day 2 hours back. He'd texted the babysitter. Maisie was covered. Sabrina was packing up her laptop when she said, without particular emphasis, "There's a school science fair next week. I saw a flyer in your notes." Travis looked up. The flyer had been folded into the back of his legal pad, which he'd been reading through earlier. Maisie's entry, he said. What did she do? A project on water purification, he paused. She started with the water cycle presentation from last month and expanded it. She's very committed. Sabrina looked at him for a moment. I meant what I said, she said, about meeting her. I'm not trying to, I know it's not. She stopped. Started again. I'm not trying to insert myself into something that isn't my place. I just thought if you were going anyway, and if you needed company. Sabrina. But if it's too much, too fast, or too complicated, I completely... Sabrina. He said it more firmly and she stopped. Yes. She looked at him. Yes, you can come. If you're sure you want to sit in a school gymnasium for 2 hours looking at third-grade science projects. I've sat through 6-hour board meetings with catered food, and I'd trade them all for something that was actually interesting, she said. Third grader explaining water purification sounds significantly more honest. She's going to ask you questions, Travis said. Maisie asks everyone questions. She doesn't really have an off switch for it. I answer questions for a living. These will be different from your questions. How different? The last person who came to pick me up for something, she asked them to explain what they ate for breakfast and whether they thought fish could feel sad. Sabrina laughed, the real one, unguarded. What did they say? They said probably not. Maisie told them they were wrong and cited something she'd seen on a nature documentary. He shrugged. Paired. Sabrina was still smiling when she finished packing her bag. "I'll be there," she said. The science fair was on a Tuesday evening in the first week of May, and the Ridgemont Elementary Gymnasium smelled of industrial cleaning solution and the particular combination of 200 children and their parents compressed into a space designed for maybe 150 people comfortably. Folding tables ran the length of the floor, covered with trifold display boards and small experiments, and the occasional ambitious model that had clearly involved significant parental scaffolding. Travis arrived with Maisie at 6, which was 30 minutes before the official start time, because Maisie required 30 minutes to verify that her display board was correctly positioned and her water samples were in the right order and the handwritten label on her control sample hadn't smudged. 15. Travis was standing near the gymnasium door when Sabrina appeared in it. She was in jeans. He'd never seen her in jeans. She had a jacket over a simple dark shirt and her hair down rather than up, and she looked like a person rather than a presentation, which he'd suspected was possible but hadn't been certain of. She looked around the gymnasium with the expression of someone arriving at a country she'd heard about, but never visited. "Hi," she said, when she reached him. "Hi," he said. She glanced around at the folding tables, the trifold boards, the parents maneuvering strollers through impossible spaces. "It's loud. Welcome to Tuesday night in elementary school. Do I look like I'm trying too hard?" He looked at her. "You look fine. I've been to 16 countries for work. This is genuinely more nerve-wracking." "Then you're taking it appropriately seriously," he said, and steered her toward Maisie's table. Maisie was adjusting the angle of her label for the third time when she saw them coming. She went still in the way children go still when something new and significant enters their field of attention, her eyes moving from her father to the woman next to him and back again with the rapid processing of someone who was filing a lot of information very quickly. "Maisie," Travis said. "This is Sabrina. She works with me." "I know," Maisie said. "You talk about her." Travis had not been aware that he talked about her. He filed this away to examine later. "Hi, Maisie," Sabrina said, crouched slightly, not all the way down, but enough to reduce the height differential, which was the right instinct. "I heard about your project. Your dad said it started with the water cycle." Maisie looked at her with the direct, unself-conscious appraisal of 8 years old. "You say it was good?" "He said you nailed the condensation part." Something shifted in Maisie's face, not a full smile yet, but its precursor. "That was the hard part," she said. "Do you want me to explain the whole thing?" "Yes," Sabrina said. And she meant it, which Travis could tell, and Maisie could tell too, because children are better at detecting genuine interest than most adults think. Maisie explained the whole thing. It took 11 minutes. Sabrina asked 4 questions, all of them real, not the encouraging. Hollow questions adults often ask children, but actual follow-up questions that indicated she'd been listening and found something worth following up on. At the 3rd question, Maisie gave her a look of measured approval that Travis recognized as significant. Afterward, while Maisie went to inspect a neighboring student's project about soil composition, Sabrina stood next to Travis and ate the popcorn that was being dispensed from a machine near the gymnasium's side wall. "She's extraordinary," Sabrina said. "Don't tell her that yet. She's still in the verification phase with you." The verification phase. She decides whether she likes people by watching how they handle being asked to explain things. If you treat the question like a burden, you're out. If you actually engage, she gives you more time. He ate some popcorn. "You did fine." "I was nervous," Sabrina said, in a tone that suggested she didn't say that out loud about many situations. "You didn't show it." "I was showing it internally at a volume that would have registered on seismic equipment." She looked at him sideways. "You talk about me." "Apparently." "What do you say?" He considered. "I don't know exactly. I must mention work more than I realize." "Or she's perceptive." "She's extremely perceptive," Travis said. "Comes from being the only other person in an apartment. You notice patterns." Sabrina was quiet for a moment. They stood together in the noise and light of the gymnasium, the folding tables around them, the very ordinary, cheerful chaos of 200 people who were not there for any reason more complicated than that their kids had made things and wanted them seen. "I like this," Sabrina said. "The popcorn, all of it." She was looking at the room. "It's very real. Nobody's angling for anything." Travis looked at her. It struck him, not for the first time, how isolated success at her level could become. The events she attended were performative by design. The relationships she maintained were transactional by necessity. The rooms she walked into had agendas, always, because in her world rooms had agendas and people who forgot that paid for it. This room was just a gymnasium. She seemed in it slightly more like a person than she was in any professional context he'd seen her in. Terrible popcorn, though, he said. Objectively terrible, she agreed, and kept eating it. The weeks that followed were not dramatic in any sense that made for good narrative. They were the slow accumulation of ordinary time, which is, in its own way, the most significant kind. Travis and Sabrina met twice a week and built the emergency preparedness framework piece by piece. It was slow and occasionally frustrating work, slow because institutions change slowly, and occasionally frustrating because the gap between what good security design required and what a regional hospital's operational reality could accommodate was wide and required constant bridging. Travis got better at understanding institutional constraints. Sabrina got better at listening to assessments she didn't want to hear. There were meetings with hospital administrators via video call where Travis laid out vulnerability assessments in plain language and watched people who'd run facilities for 20 years discover that the systems they'd trusted were less robust than they'd believed. He learned how to deliver that information in a way that was honest, without being demoralizing, a skill he'd had to learn before, in different rooms, when the assessment being delivered had stakes measured in different units. He also discovered things about Sabrina that the Cresthaven Hotel and 3 weeks of crisis management had not revealed. She was funny. Not in an obvious way, not joke-telling funny, but she had a dry, quick-moving sense of humor that surfaced in the gaps between serious things, usually at moments when she'd dropped her executive register and forgotten to pick it back up. The first time it surfaced in a way Travis couldn't attribute to stress-induced looseness, they were in the coffee shop on a rainy afternoon in May, and she was reading through a regulatory compliance document that was, by any objective measure, the most boring document Travis had encountered since a manual on facility drainage systems he'd read during his first week at the Cresthaven. She looked up from it and said, entirely deadpan, I want you to know that I built a company from scratch, survived a kidnapping attempt, dismantled a 6-year corporate conspiracy, and this document is the thing that might actually defeat me. Travis laughed. A real one, which surprised him slightly. 14 more pages, he said. I'll need more coffee. You've had 3 already. 14 more pages, she repeated. He went and got her coffee. This was not, he reflected, the kind of thing he'd expected to be doing 6 weeks ago. He also discovered that she burned pancakes. This was not a metaphor. She had mentioned, offhandedly, that she occasionally cooked on Sunday mornings as a form of decompression, and he'd filed it away as unlikely. And then one Sunday in early June, she'd texted him a photo of a pan containing something that had clearly begun its life as pancake batter, and ended it as a culinary cautionary tale, with the caption, I maintain this is the pan's fault. He'd replied, sure. She'd sent back rude. He'd replied, send me the recipe. I'll make them. She'd replied, after a pause, you can cook? He'd replied, pasta and 4 other things. She'd replied, pancakes? He'd replied, pancakes. They'd had breakfast at her apartment the following Sunday. Travis and Maisie arriving at 9. Maisie immediately, and without embarrassment, beginning an inspection of Sabrina's apartment with the thoroughness of a small building inspector, and Travis making pancakes in the kitchen, while Sabrina watched with the expression of someone observing a skill they genuinely respected. You flip them without a spatula, she said. Wrist thing, he said. Show me. He showed her. She tried it. She dropped half a pancake on the stove and looked at it with profound personal offense, and Travis kept his expression very careful. Not a word, she said. I didn't say anything. You were thinking something. I was thinking the wrist thing takes practice. You were thinking I burned it. I was thinking, he said, handing her the spatula, that you're better at 14-page regulatory documents than pancake flipping. And that seems like a reasonable trade. Maisie appeared in the kitchen doorway and assessed the situation with the pragmatism of someone who wanted breakfast. Is it done? She said. Almost, Travis said. Sabrina burned one, Maisie said, with the forensic certainty of someone who'd been listening from the other room. I can hear your father not defending me, Sabrina said. He doesn't defend people about cooking, Maisie said, climbing onto a counter stool. He just makes it again. She looked at Sabrina with the evaluating seriousness she brought to most assessments. He'll show you. He showed me. Sabrina looked at Travis. He set a plate of successful pancakes on the counter. She's right, he said. Eat first. The thing between them, whatever it was, and Travis was deliberate about not naming it, before it named itself, moved in the slow and unannounced way of things that don't require a declaration to become real. It was present in the way they talked now, which had shifted from professional with warmth to something that didn't have a neat category. It was present in the Sunday mornings, which had become a loose pattern rather than a single occasion. It was present in the fact that Maisie had begun mentioning Sabrina in the natural, offhand way. She mentioned things that had become part of the furniture of her life, not as an event, but as a given. Travis was aware of it. He was also aware of the specific weight of his own caution, which was not fear exactly, but something adjacent to it, the recognition that his daughter was in this equation, in a way that made the stakes different from anything else. He'd had exactly one relationship in the 5 years since coming home from his last deployment and finding the apartment empty. It had lasted 8 months and ended not badly but incompletely, the way things end when two people discover they fit in some ways and not in others, and are honest enough to acknowledge it before it became something worse. The woman had been kind. Maisie had met her twice. Travis had not let it go further than that before he was sure, and he hadn't been sure. Different. He didn't push at why it was different. He just acknowledged that it was. The conversation that mattered happened at the end of June, on an evening when Maisie was at a sleepover, and Travis had driven Sabrina home from a late working session and walked her to the lobby of her building, because it was the kind of evening where neither of them seemed to be in a hurry. They stood in the lobby, and there was a pause of the specific kind that means something is waiting to be said. "I don't want to be something that complicated your life," Sabrina said. "You've built something careful. The routine, the structure, Maisie. I don't want to be the person who I know what I am. What my work is. What it takes from the people around me. I've watched what it does. What it does to who?" Travis said. "Relationships. People." She looked at him directly. "I've been the person who didn't come home for dinners. Who missed things? Who made the career the primary fact and everything else secondary? That's not—" She stopped. "I don't think I want to keep being that person. But I don't know yet if I know how to be a different one." Travis looked at her for a moment. "You came to a school gymnasium and ate terrible popcorn for 2 hours," he said. "That's not— For you it is," he said. "You don't do things halfway when you decide to do them. The governance review, the preparedness program, every conversation we've had in the past 3 months." He paused. "You don't have to know how to be a different person before you start being one. That's not how it works. How does it work? You just make different choices, repeatedly, until the different choices become what you actually do." She held his gaze with the direct, unblinking attention she gave to things that mattered. "I don't want to hurt Maisie," she said. "If this doesn't—" "I know," he said. "Neither do I. That's why I'm not moving fast. But I'm not standing still either." He put his hands in his pockets. "I'm aware of what this is, Sabrina. I've been aware of it for a while." "So have I," she said quietly. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Travis said, "I'll call you tomorrow." And she nodded. And he walked back to his car through a June evening that was warm and still and unremarkable in every external way. He drove home. The apartment was quiet without Maisie in it, which it always was, but it was a different kind of quiet than usual. Not empty. Something that felt, if he paid attention, like the particular quiet before a change you've already decided to accept. He made coffee he didn't drink and sat at the kitchen table and looked at Gerald Jr. on the refrigerator. He thought about a woman who'd been built for performance, discovering she wanted a life. He thought about what it cost to choose something real over something safe. He thought about Maisie asleep at her friend's house, unworried, the way children sleep when they believe the people around them have the situation in hand. He thought about the panhandle he'd fixed in March, and how it had stayed fixed. Turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. He slept, which was not always something that came easily, and which felt, on this particular night, like a small and uncomplicated gift. The call from Reyes came on a Friday morning in late September, 16 months after a maintenance worker had found a shim in a lock and recognized a pattern that changed the direction of several lives simultaneously. Travis was in the parking lot of a hospital in Pueblo, Colorado, to a small regional facility that had signed on as one of the first participants in the emergency preparedness program, finishing a site assessment that had taken 3 days and produced 40 pages of notes in his legal pad. He was standing next to his car in the September morning air, which had the particular sharpness of elevation in early autumn, when his phone buzzed. "It's done," Reyes said. "Bennett Crowley pled guilty this morning." 16 counts. Fraud, conspiracy, attempted kidnapping, unauthorized access to protected computer systems, and several others I won't list because we'd be here until noon. A pause. He'll be sentenced in December. The prosecutor's office is recommending 12 to 15 years. Travis leaned against the car door. And Fell? He said. Marcus Fell accepted a cooperation agreement 4 weeks ago. I couldn't tell you until it was fully executed. He's provided testimony on 3 additional corporate intelligence cases across 2 states. He's looking at 8 years with cooperation credit, which is less than he deserves, but more than he'd have gotten if we'd had to build the case without him. Her voice was dry at the edges. The law is imperfect. I know, Travis said. What I can tell you is that both of them are finished. The shell companies are dissolved, the assets are in recovery proceedings, and the network Fell built over 12 years has been documented in enough detail that it'll take a significant optimist to try to bet to rebuild something similar in the healthcare sector for a very long time. Travis looked at the hospital building across the parking lot. It was a modest facility, 3 stories, aging brick, the kind of place that served a community that didn't have the option of driving 2 hours to a larger city for routine care. He'd spent 3 days walking its corridors, talking to its security staff, mapping its vulnerabilities, and thinking about what it would mean for a place like this to fail in an emergency. How's the case holding in terms of Sabrina's reputation? He said. Clean, Reyes said. The independent governance review helped significantly. Every outlet that covered the arrest covered the review as well. The narrative isn't CEO's company had a corrupt COO. The narrative is CEO commissioned full transparency review and cooperated completely with investigators. She handled it correctly. Travis said nothing. Because she had handled it correctly, and because the strategy had been built in a coffee shop over a legal pad and terrible coffee, and some things didn't need to be said out loud to be satisfying. Thank you, Reyes, he said, for keeping me informed throughout. You gave me the shim in the lock, she said. I figure we're square. A brief pause. Take care of yourself, Kellan. She hung up. Travis stood in the parking lot for a moment, letting the morning air sit on him. A week ago, Maisie had asked him if he ever missed his old job. Not the maintenance work she'd been specific, the way she was specific about most things. His old job. The Navy. He'd thought about it honestly, which was the only way to answer her. Sometimes I miss knowing exactly what I was for, he'd said. In that job, the purpose was clear. The skills I had matched the problem in front of me. Don't they now? She'd said. He'd looked at her, this 9-year-old person, who had her mother's eyes in his hands and opinions about everything that she'd formed independently and defended with evidence and thought about Pueblo, Colorado, and 40 pages of notes, and a program that was going to make small hospitals less vulnerable to exactly the kind of failure that could get people killed. Yeah, he'd said. I think they do. Maisie had nodded as if this confirmed something she'd already known. He called Sabrina. She was in a board meeting and couldn't answer, which he'd expected. He left a voicemail that said Reyes called. It's done. Call me when you're out. She called back 47 minutes later, and he was on the highway back toward Denver when her name appeared on his phone screen. I heard, she said. Reyes reached me through the company line. Her voice was steady, professionally steady, which he could now distinguish from genuinely steady, but underneath the professional surface, he could hear something else. The particular sound of a person releasing a breath they'd been holding for 16 months. How do you feel? He asked. I don't know yet, she said honestly. I think I've been running at a pace that didn't allow for feeling things, and now I'm going to have to slow down enough to find out what's underneath. That's a reasonable approach. Is it? It sounds like avoidance. No, he said. Avoidance is not wanting to look. What you're describing is not being ready yet, which is different. The thing you're avoiding is still going to be there when you look. Pause. That's either comforting or slightly ominous. Probably both. She made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and an exhale. Travis, she said, I want to do something this weekend. All 3 of us. Something that has nothing to do with work, or the case, or any of it. What did you have in mind? I don't know, she said. You pick. You're better at the things that aren't work. He drove for a moment, watching the high plains of the eastern slope give way to the foothills as the highway curved west toward Denver. There's a lake, he said, up past Evergreen. Maisie's been asking to go all summer, and I keep not finding the time. Then we should find the time, Sabrina said. It was simple the way she said it, not performed. Just simple. Saturday, he said. Saturday, she agreed. The legal proceedings occupied the autumn in the way legal proceedings do present, but not immediate. A process unfolding in courtrooms and offices that Travis and Sabrina were connected to, but no longer driving. There were follow-up interviews with prosecutors, documentation requests, a deposition in late October that required Sabrina to sit for 6 hours in a conference room, while lawyers asked her detailed questions about events she'd already described in thorough detail to investigators 6 months earlier. She came out of it in the evening with the expression of someone who'd been wrung out and set to dry. Travis was waiting in the lobby of the legal firm because she'd asked him to come, and he'd brought coffee from the place 3 blocks from her office, the one that was overpriced but reliable, because some situations called for reliable. She took the coffee and looked at him. "Tell me something that has nothing to do with any of this," she said. He thought for a moment. "Maisie informed me this morning that she's decided to become a marine biologist," he said. She presented a 4-point argument. Point 2 was that fish probably can feel sad, which she's apparently been building a case for since 2nd grade. Sabrina leaned her head against the elevator wall and closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, the tension in her face had shifted. "She's going to be something," she said. "She already is." They rode down to the lobby in comfortable silence. Travis had learned that Sabrina processed things in silence and didn't require him to fill it, which was a compatibility he'd registered early and appreciated more as time went on. Outside, the October air was cold enough to make the coffee matter. "Prosecutor thinks December sentencing," she said. "They're confident on the recommendation." "Good. It won't feel like closure," she said. "Not the way I used to imagine closure felt. I thought it would be—" She paused. "I thought when it was done, there would be a clear before and after, like a door shutting, and it's more like a window that's been jammed open finally being able to close. Except the room was cold long enough that closing the window doesn't immediately make it warm." She looked at her coffee cup. "That metaphor got away from me." "No, I understood it," Travis said. She looked at him sideways. "You always understand the things I say when I don't explain them properly." You explain things properly," he said. "You're just harder on yourself about how you sound than you need to be." Quiet for a moment. "Bennett called it a professional relationship," she said. "Me and him, early on. He told me he didn't blur personal and professional, that it was one of his strengths. I used to admire that about him." Travis waited. "I think it was a warning I didn't hear," she said. "Someone who doesn't blur anything between people, that's not a strength. That's an absence." He thought about this. "Some people use professionalism the way other people use distance," he said, "to make sure nothing reaches them. Is that what I did?" He considered her honestly. "You built walls," he said. "But you also built a company that employed a lot of people and a program that's going to protect rural hospitals. So the walls weren't the whole story." That's a generous reading. It's an accurate one. Generous and accurate aren't mutually exclusive. She looked at him for a long moment. The October street was quiet around them, the late hour thinning the foot traffic to occasional pairs and solitary figures. "I didn't know what to do with you at the beginning," she said, "when you found me in that corridor. My first thought was I need to figure out if I can trust this person, and my second thought was that I had no basis for that assessment and no time to develop one." She paused. "I had to just decide based on almost nothing. And I decided right," she said, "which I don't do perfectly. Ask anyone who worked for me in 2021. I made 3 significant hiring decisions that year that were wrong in different directions and costly in different ways." She looked at him. "But I decided right about you. You had good instincts," he said, "even before you had the information to back them up. You gave me reason to trust them." He said nothing. What she was describing was real, and he didn't want to diminish it by filling it with words. She finished her coffee and looked at the empty cup. "Walk me home?" she said. He walked her home. It was 12 blocks and took 25 minutes because neither of them was in a hurry, and the city at 10 on a Tuesday, October night was quiet in the particular way that cities get when the working world has stood down, and the people still outside are the ones who chose to be. They talked about nothing important, the preparedness program's next site. A documentary Maisie had watched and then summarized in exhausting and enthusiastic detail over dinner the previous week. Whether Denver's winter was going to be worse than the last one, which had involved a February event that had knocked power for 3 days in parts of the metro area, and given Travis a detailed, practical case study in exactly the kind of infrastructure failures the program was designed to address. The lobby of her building, she turned to him. 12 to 15 years, she said. That's what Bennett's looking at. Yes. And I'm standing on a sidewalk in October, talking about winter weather patterns. She said it not with satisfaction, with something more complicated. The acknowledgement that survival doesn't arrive feeling like victory. It arrives feeling like a Tuesday night on a sidewalk, ordinary and real and yours. That's what it looks like, Travis said, when it's over. She nodded slowly. Then she went inside. He walked back to where he'd parked and drove home and found Maisie's light still on because she was 9 now, negotiating bedtime with the strategic persistence of someone who understood that persistence itself was a form of argument. He knocked. 10 more minutes, she said. You said that 40 minutes ago. Time is relative, she said, which she'd learned from a science video and had been deploying inappropriately but with confidence ever since. Lights out in 5, he said. He heard her book close. He went to the kitchen, stood at the window, and looked at the Denver night, the lights across the city, the dark mass of the mountains at the edge of the western horizon, invisible in the dark, but present the way things are present when you know they're there. He thought about a woman who was learning to close a window. He thought about the fact that he was in love with her, which was not a thought he'd said out loud yet to anyone, including himself with that specific word. It had been present for a while now, in the way certain facts are present before they're named, doing its work quietly, organizing other things around itself. He thought, yes, that's what this is. The kitchen was quiet. Gerald Jr. was still on the refrigerator, slightly curled at one corner now from being up there so long. He turned off the light and went to bed. Bennett Crowley was sentenced on a Thursday in December to 13 years in a federal correctional facility. Marcus Fell received 7 years with his cooperation credit applied. Both sentences were covered by the financial press and the healthcare industry newsletter, and one larger outlet that ran a piece about corporate internal fraud that used the Westcott case as its primary example. The piece was careful and accurate, and Sabrina was quoted twice, both times in sentences that her communications director had helped shape and that were, to Travis's ear, recognizably hers underneath the polish. Texted him when the sentencing came through. 13 years. It's real. He texted back, it's real. She sent, are you busy tonight? He sent, Maisie has a sleepover. She sent, come over. I'll make dinner. He sent, I'll bring backup ingredients. She sent, that's insulting. He sent, it's practical. She sent back 3 separate messages in quick succession. Fine. Yes. Bring the good pasta. He brought the good pasta. She'd made something that was, against reasonable expectation, genuinely good. Chicken thing with lemon that she'd apparently been practicing for 2 weeks without telling him, which he'd discovered when she mentioned it, with the careful casualness of someone trying not to seem like they'd been practicing. You've been practicing, he said. I've been expanding my repertoire, she said. 2 weeks. Repetition builds skill, Travis. It's not complicated. He ate the chicken thing. It was good. He told her it was good. I know, she said, and for a moment she looked 12 years old in the best possible way, the uncomplicated satisfaction of someone who set out to do something and did it. They ate at her kitchen table, which she'd never eaten at in the time he'd known her. She'd always worked at it, but eating at it seemed to be a newer development. She'd put a candle on it that was slightly too tall for the space and had to be moved twice. The adjustment was imperfect, and both of them ignored it and ate anyway. After dinner, she poured wine, and they sat for a long time and talked in the way that people talk when there isn't an agenda moving between things without purpose, following the conversation wherever it went. She told him about the acquisition, which had finally closed in October, and the work of integrating the new organization into Westcott's structure, which was the unglamorous real work that followed the announcement. She told him about a conversation she'd had with her mother, who lived in Phoenix and who Sabrina spoke to with a frequency and warmth that had apparently been a more recent development than it might have appeared, something she'd been building back, carefully, after years of the career being the answer to everything. She asked me if I was happy, Sabrina said. What did you tell her? I told her I was getting there. She turned her wine glass. Not the nervous turning from the early months, slower, more settled, which is true. It's not a finished state, but the direction is right. Travis looked at her across the table. Sabrina, he said. I need to tell you something. She looked up. Her expression shifted, not alarmed, but attentive in the particular way she became attentive when she decided something mattered. I've been working up to this for a while, he said, which you probably know. I had some sense, she said carefully. I don't do things quickly when they involve Maisie, he said. I needed to be certain. Not about you. About the whole thing. Whether this was stopped. Try it again. Whether I was building something or just feeling something. Because feeling something isn't enough, for her sake. I know, Sabrina said quietly. I'm building something, he said. With you. I'm sure of that now. He paused. I love you. That's what I needed to say. The apartment was very quiet. Sabrina held his gaze across the table, and her face did something complicated and true, not the CEO composure, not the professional mask, but the real face of a woman who had been handed something she hadn't let herself expect and was figuring out how to hold it without dropping it. I love you, she said. I've known it for a while. I just wasn't sure if it was, I wanted to be sure I was saying it because it was true, and not because you're the person who pulled me out of a basement and I'd transferred something onto mine. Sabrina, I'm talking through my reasoning, I know. You can stop. She stopped. She looked at him. Something in her face settled. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then she reached across the table and took his hand, and he turned his hand over and held hers, and they sat like that in the December kitchen with the impractical candle and the remains of dinner and the city quiet outside the window. It was not a perfect moment. The candle was wrong for the space. The wine was slightly too cold. Travis had a grounding fault ticket open at a hotel across town that he'd been meaning to close for a week. Sabrina had an 8:15 board call the following morning that she was already slightly dreading. It was real, which is better than perfect, and lasts longer. 2 years that followed were not without difficulty, because nothing that involves real people and real lives is without difficulty. And anyone who tells a story of transformation without the friction is telling a story about someone else. There were weeks in the spring of the following year when the preparedness program hit a funding wall that required Sabrina and Travis to spend 3 weeks in conversations with hospital network administrators and state health officials that were. Frustrating in the specific way, institutional negotiations are frustrating the sense that the right answer is visible to everyone in the room, and the path to it is blocked by 17 different concerns that are each individually legitimate. Travis learned to sit in those meetings without the impatience that had characterized his early civilian years, when the pace of institutional life had felt like moving through water compared to the decisive speed of military operations. He was not always patient, but he was more patient than he'd been, and the program moved. Sabrina learned to leave the office. Not easily, and not without backsliding. There were stretches, especially around the acquisition integration, when she disappeared into the work in a way that Travis recognized and called out, not confrontationally, but honestly, which was the only way it worked between them. She didn't love being called out. She was also, after a pause and usually a day, honest enough to acknowledge that he was right. She made the 8:15 board call. She also made Maisie's school play in November, sitting in the third row with Travis and clapping harder than was strictly necessary when Maisie delivered 3 lines as a tree, with the absolute conviction of someone who had committed fully to the role. Maisie decided she wanted to be a marine biologist and then a paleontologist and then a forensic scientist in sequence, each new ambition as total and certain as the last. Travis bought books about each field as they emerged and read them alongside her when she'd let him, which was most of the time. Sabrina became, slowly and without announcement, a fixture in the shape of their life. Not a replacement for anything that had been missing, more like a room that had always been in the house, but that they'd been using as storage and discovered, when they finally cleared it out, was actually quite good for living in. Maisie called her Sabrina for a year and a half. Then one Saturday morning in the kitchen, during a pancake session that Sabrina had by this point genuinely improved at not Travis level, but competent, the kind of competent that arrives through repetition and honesty about failure. Maisie said something that nobody planned. She was watching Sabrina flip a pancake and she said, casually, the way she said most important things, "Do you think you'll always live in your apartment?" Sabrina looked at Travis. Travis looked at the pan. "I don't know," Sabrina said carefully. Why? Maisie considered the pancake with the expression she used for scientific observation. "Because this apartment is nicer," she said, meaning Travis's apartment, "but yours has the better view." She paused. "Maybe you could both live in one of them." Silence. "That's a big conversation, Bug," Travis said. "I know," Maisie said. "I'm just saying." She picked up her fork. "Both of you could share the making breakfast job. Sabrina does the orange juice. You do the pancakes. It's more efficient." Sabrina made a sound that was trying very hard not to be a laugh. We'll talk about it, Travis said. Okay, Maisie said, with the tone of someone who has made her position known and is content to let the adults work out the logistics. The lake was Travis's idea. He'd been thinking about it since September, and when he finally said it out loud, on a Tuesday evening when Maisie was at a sleepover and Sabrina was sitting across from him at the kitchen table with her shoes off and her laptop closed, came out differently than he'd rehearsed it, which was fine, because rehearsed things rarely arrive the way they're planned. He'd bought the ring 3 weeks earlier. He'd been carrying it in the pocket of his jacket, which was either the most responsible thing he'd done keeping it close, not leaving it somewhere Maisie might find it, or the most anxious, depending on how you looked at it. The lake up past Evergreen, he said. The one we went to in July. Sabrina looked up. With the mosquitoes? Those were minimal. Travis Maisie had 6 bites on one arm. The point is it's a good lake, he said. She looked at him. She was looking at him in the particular way. She looked at things she was assembling. Not suspicious, just accurate. Okay, she said. Saturday, he said. Okay, she said again, and looked at him a moment longer, and then looked back at the table with the expression of someone who has a sense of where something is going and has decided to let it get there. The Saturday was the kind of day that late August in the Colorado mountains produces without apology, warm in the sun, cool in the shade, the air so clear that the distance felt compressed, the far ridgeline close enough to touch if you believed in it. They drove up past Evergreen in the morning. Maisie in the back seat with her book and her sunscreen and her running commentary on the landscape, which she'd decided to narrate like a nature documentary. Sabrina rode in the passenger seat with her window partially down, and her hair moving in the way it moved when she'd stopped managing it and let the trip take over. The lake was quiet when they arrived. A family at the far end was packing up to leave. By the time they'd set up near the water, the family was gone, and the lake was theirs. Maisie immediately investigated the shoreline, with the forensic attention she brought to all natural environments, cataloging rocks and waterline debris with the seriousness of a professional. Travis and Sabrina sat near the water on the flat rock they'd used in July, which was warm from the morning sun. They talked for a while, about nothing in particular. Program. The hospital network in New Mexico that had finally committed to a full implementation. A book Sabrina had been reading. Whether Maisie was going to follow through on the marine biology ambition or pivot again, and what the over-under was on the next field. The afternoon went quiet. Maisie was 20 yards away, crouched near the waterline, deeply engaged with something in the rocks. Travis put his hand in his jacket pocket. He'd thought about how to say this for weeks, and had ultimately decided that the thing that was true was simpler than any of the versions he'd constructed. Sabrina had always responded better to the simple true thing than to the crafted version, and he knew her well enough now to give her what actually fit rather than what sounded right. I want to build the rest of my life with you, he said. You and Maisie, the 3 of us, as whatever shape that takes. I want mornings and school plays and bad pancake attempts and the hard weeks and all of it. He paused. I know what I'm asking. I know what it costs. I know that you've been building towards something, and this changes the shape of it, and I don't want to pretend otherwise. Sabrina was very still beside him. I know who you are now, he said. Not who I thought you were in a corridor. Not who you were under crisis conditions. The real version. The one who practices chicken for 2 weeks and won't admit it, and who laughs at Maisie's arguments even when she's trying to hold a position. He pulled the ring from his pocket. The version I'd like to keep. If that's something you want. The ring was not elaborate. He'd spent time on it, a jeweler in Cherry Creek, who'd listened carefully and come back with something that was simple and well-made, and had a specific quality that Travis had wanted without being able to name and tell. He saw it. It looked like something that would last. Sabrina looked at it, then at him. Her face was doing the complicated true thing it did when something reached her, not the CEO composure, not the professional careful surface, but the real face, the one that had been visible in the mechanical room and the elevator lobby and the December kitchen. The face that was hers when she forgot to manage it. Yes, she said. Her voice was steady and not entirely steady simultaneously, which was the most honest a voice could be. Yes, Travis. He put the ring on her hand. From 20 yards away, Maisie said. She said yes. Both turned. Maisie was standing at the waterline with her shoes wet, holding a rock she'd apparently found interesting, looking at them with an expression that contained absolutely no surprise. You knew, Travis said. I helped pick the ring, Maisie said with enormous dignity. 3 weeks ago. He took me to the jewelry store, and I gave my opinion. Sabrina turned to Travis. She has good taste, he said. I wanted a sexant opinion. Sabrina looked at the ring on her hand, and then at the 9-year-old at the waterline who was watching them with the calm satisfaction of someone whose plan had executed correctly. Come here, Sabrina said. Maisie came. Not running, she walked, with the particular gait she used when she was trying to seem less excited than she was, which had never successfully deceived anyone who knew her. Sabrina put her arm around her, and Maisie leaned in the way she did with people she trusted fully without checking first, just leaning. The three of them sat together on the warm, flat rock above the lake. The water was still. The afternoon was holding its light the way late August holds it, stretched, golden, reluctant to go. Nobody said anything for a while. Travis looked at the two of them beside him and thought about a parking lot in March and a girl running across it in pajamas. He thought about a lock with a shim in it and a man he'd been for 12 years and set aside, and the way nothing you've truly been ever leaves you, it waits, instead, until something asks for it again. He thought about what it meant to bury a version of yourself out of love for your daughter, and to discover years later that the burial wasn't permanent, that the skills and the instincts and even the hardest parts of who he'd been had a place in this life, not the life of combat or covert operations or the specific loneliness of a man whose work required him to stay invisible, but a life that was specific and ordinary and entirely his. There is something that people who've carried significant weight learn. Eventually, if they're fortunate, that the weight does not have to be the story. The weight is part of the story, but the story is larger than the weight. Travis had been a SEAL. He had also been an absent father for 3 years because the work required it, and he had come home to emptiness and remade his life from components he had to source himself, without a manual, making it up as he went in the way most people make their lives imperfectly, with revision, getting some of it wrong and enough of it right. He had become, in a corridor beneath a hotel, the thing he'd buried. And the thing he'd buried had saved a woman he was now going to marry. None of this was the story he'd planned. Very few good stories are. Sabrina was watching the lake. She had the expression she wore sometimes in the coffee shop, when the work had stopped, and she'd forgotten to pick up the CEO version of herself open and slightly wondering, like someone still getting used to the dimensions of a room they'd recently been allowed into. She had been a woman for whom excellence was the price of belonging. She'd learned it early, carried it everywhere, built something remarkable with it, and in the process built walls so precise and well-maintained that she'd stopped noticing they were walls and started calling them character. A man in a maintenance uniform had noticed the walls. He hadn't tried to knock them down. He'd just kept showing up on the other side of them. Being consistent, being honest, not being impressed by the things designed to impress people, until one day the walls became unnecessary and she forgot to put them back up. She was not finished changing. Neither was he. That was not how people worked, and anyone who told you transformation was a destination rather than a direction was selling something. But the direction was right. Maisie picked up the interesting rock from the ground beside her and held it up so the afternoon light went through it, which revealed a vein of quartz running through its center, like a seam of something bright hidden inside ordinary stone. Look, she said. They both looked. You have to hold it exactly right, Maisie said, or you can't see it. Travis looked at his daughter, then at the woman who was going to be her mother, who was looking at the rock with the genuine attention she gave to things that earned it. Yeah, he said, you do. The lake held the afternoon light. The mountains were exactly where they'd always been. And the three of them sat together on a warm, flat rock above the water, in no particular hurry to be anywhere else. This was not the end of difficulty. Difficulty doesn't end. The program would have more funding walls and more frustrating meetings and more weeks when the gap between what was needed and what was available felt impossible to bridge. Maisie would grow up and discover new ambitions and new hardships, and the world would be, for her as for everyone, a mix of what she'd been prepared for and what she hadn't. Sabrina would have bored weeks that consumed everything, and weeks when she remembered, sometimes by her own discipline and sometimes because a man and a 9-year-old made it obvious that the company was what she did and not the entirety of what she was. Travis would have nights when the buried years surfaced in the particular way they surfaced, not dramatically, not with the cinematic weight of a man haunted, but with the quiet, specific persistence of a past that doesn't forget you even when you've moved beyond it. He would handle those nights the way he handled most things now. Directly, without pretending they weren't happening, with the knowledge that morning was reliable, and Maisie's cereal needed restocking, and Sabrina's coffee preference had to be managed carefully before 9 a.m. The ordinary specific texture of an actual life, which was, in the end, the only kind worth having. The former SEAL sat on a rock above a Colorado lake with his daughter and the woman they both loved in the last of the summer afternoon light, and was not anywhere else. Not watching an entrance, not calculating an exit, not buried. Home.